The next question that I received is, under Michigan, the unions were able to manipulate pension payoffs for teachers and other state and local employees. Why don't we cut the pension payoffs here in Illinois?
Yeah.
Some of the pension payoffs in Michigan.
Michigan. I don't know. What to give me? Is it for a lawsuit? So I can write it down, sure.
So the question is about pensions. And we were just talking about this offline, and it is an important issue to tackle for our state finances. The one thing is we want to assess what got us into the position that we're in, where the state every single year is making very large pension payments. It's because governors in the past, Republican and Democratic, and actually started under Republican government in the 1990s, they changed the law to allow the states to skip pension payments instead of mandating it. And then you can imagine what happened is pension payments were skipped year after year after year after year. Now we all know what happens if we skip a bill and then suddenly have to start paying it because we have no choice. That bill is going to be really large. And that's what's happened with pensions. Now, there is definitely abuse or examples that get attention as they rightfully should, where people game the system and end up getting higher payoffs than what seems fair. And we should tackle that issue, absolutely. The average pension is actually not very large. Most of the public servants who spent 20 or 30 years of their life in working for government, many of them not paying into Social Security, not receiving Social Security, they depend on their modest pensions. And so what we need to do is to make sure that we are making our payments on time and not skipping them for political pet projects that people in the past have taken on.
And just to add to that, the thing is that, remember, the pension or the payment of pensions, particularly for state and municipal employees, is embedded in the Illinois Constitution. It's required in the Constitution to make those payments. And these tend to be, the highest tend to be municipal employees, as well as teachers' unions. So that's the issue. Now, this was actually, there was an attempt to tackle this issue by Governor Quinn. So he passed legislation to try to alter that and reduce the payment on those pensions. Well, what happens, the teachers' unions and other unions got together and they filed a lawsuit in the state of Illinois. Ultimately, it went directly to the the Illinois Supreme Court. The Illinois Supreme Court agreed with the unions and gutted the legislation. Why? Because it's in the Constitution. So in order to change that system, what's going to be required is a constitutional amendment to the Illinois Constitution. Otherwise, you keep paying the system because that's the system that was put into place in the early 70s by both Democrats and Republicans, and that's the system that's in place, that's the lawful system that we have to pay into right now.
I think the last thing I will add on is, once again, while knocking on doors, talking to folks that are retired teachers in the community, one thing I would advise for our community to do is to not villainize retired teachers. Because as a beneficiary of public education, some of these people, they are just in the system, right? They weren't told, they couldn't get a 401k. This was their only option. And now they're receiving pension benefits. And in fact, in 2011, we actually cut down the pension benefits. We were at a T1 pension system, and we went to a T2 pension system, which has significantly fewer benefits. So they tried to address the problem in 2011, but at the end of the day, what I believe is the solution is making sure that our state is passing balanced budgets and funding the pension system as it should, to avoid the decades of unfunding and unfunding that happened just for political points, and that compromised these retired teachers' pensions, retired law enforcement, retired firefighters. So one thing I would say is that there is a lot of rhetoric on the other side that does blame teachers, and to me as seeing these people who educated me and made me the person that I am, that doesn't settle right with me. So that's something I would encourage. The only thing I would kind of add on to it.
And sorry, not to go twice, I just Googled it. The average teacher pension in Illinois is $49,500, right? So when we hear, frankly, some of the fear mongering about, with all these six-figure pension payouts and people making $200,000 a year, that's not the reality for most retirees.
Sorry, the last thing I will add on is that it doesn't feel like it yet, but Illinois has truly turned a corner in their fiscal health. Susana Mendoza, she paid back $17.3 billion worth of debt that we owed to vendors as a state. The average, I don't even know what the average day is to pay back to pay a bill to a vendor. I think it's like 14 days now. That is unheard of. And that is, I will say, that is because we have Democratic leadership in these seats. So I know you might not feel it in your pocketbook yet. I know your property taxes are still very high, but we have received 6 credit upgrades in the past 2 years alone. And in the past 20 years, we actually received 8 credit downgrades. So inshallah, we'll get there slowly but surely, but I can tell you that us three, we have fiscal accountability at the forefront of our mind, because it is at the forefront of your mind too, in the forefront of the mind of the people in our district. So we will work to find solutions, to find answers to these issues that have large-scale problems.
And this is going to be the last question. I got several cards here that talks about the elementary education, school curriculum, and liberal ideas that have been promoted or propagated in school. I'm going to sum that question. Someone wrote here, your thoughts about LGBTQ and teaching young kids about it. It's a very open-ended question. Let's give 2 minutes to each candidate, and then we'll wrap the question and answer round after this.
I will say
1 minute, please.
a thing that is very, very important for our community is to keep politics separate and then keep our masjid life a little bit separate. Obviously, that's ironic because we're in a masjid right now. But there is, I am a strong proponent of making sure whatever curriculum is introduced, whatever curriculum for healthcare is introduced in these schools, there's parental consent. So you decide if your kids are opted into this curriculum. You decide whether or not your kid is learning this at certain different age groups. Because that's important. That's important for our community. That's important for many, many people in the community. But what I will say, as a hijab-wearing Muslim woman, I started wearing this at my own discretion, starting 9th grade. I know what it's like to be bullied. I know what it's like to be called terrorist and to have a beach ball thrown at my face during a football game. I understand what discrimination looks like for young people in high school. And whatever we can do to keep people safe, to keep young people safe, regardless of what their personal beliefs are, I want to make sure we're doing that. But I also want to make sure that as a Muslim woman myself, in my personal life, I'm drawing the lines for my family and my community where I see aligns with my faith. And I'm making sure that in my own life, I'm protecting my future kids, and I want to keep that separate from politics, if that makes sense. I don't know if that answered the question, but
I think there's a lot of things that we can do to participate. In my experience, unfortunately, our community, we tend to complain a lot about our situation, whether it's international or if it's local. We complain about this issue, that issue. Well, it's very simple. If you are really concerned about the education that your children are getting, participate in school board meetings. Join your parent-teacher associations. Become leaders in these organizations. In fact, there's elections coming up for local school districts as well. I'm not suggesting that every time you have a concern that you should run for office, not at all. But at least participate in your community. Get involved in your local civic efforts at the educational level in particular. And if you're concerned, get your parents together and meet with them privately and say, hey, this is our concern, what can we do? Talk to people. So getting involved is important. It's not enough to simply be concerned. Secondly, there's also, like what the Nasser said about property taxes, there's a lot of fear mongering about LGTB education. The legislation that was passed by the House and the Senate recently about mandating certain kinds of curriculum as it relates to LGTB, it gives complete discretion to local school districts to opt out. So your local school district can opt out from teaching certain things for certain levels and so forth, plus of course the parental consent that Nabila mentioned. So there's a lot of different options for people to use so that, if you don't want your school district to teach certain kind of things at certain ages, you can ask them to opt out. If they didn't opt out, ask them why. So you do have a voice, we just have to use it more collectively and strategically.
I don't have much to add. I think our parents' involvement in their kids' education is paramount. Having the option, as the state law does allow you to opt your kid out or opt them in, take advantage of that. And of course, get involved in your local school boards. That is where most of the decision making actually happens on this issue.
Sorry, I just want to follow up on that. A lot of times when we think about education, we think either public school or we go to Islamic school. In other words, Islamic school should be the option, the second option. And I know that there's an MEC Academy here next door. How about we get involved in the public school system? Because the public school system has the largest population of Muslim kids, not the private schools. Right? Vast majority, like something like 70, 80%, or maybe even higher, go to public school. So you should be directly involved, not just worried about their grades only. Are they getting A's in math and science and so forth? But make sure that what are they learning? Be involved. And this goes particularly for the younger generation of people who have children in, junior high and grammar school. Be involved in that school district and see what's going on.
With that last question, we're gonna end the question and answer session now. We would be serving dinner at everyone's table, so please stay seated for the dinner. The volunteers would be bringing dinner to you, so you don't have to get up and leave the room. That's gonna happen after our next topic, which is the importance of supporting our candidates by our own brother Habib Kadri.